I want you to know that I am placing myself in a position of danger by openly exposing the Masonic Lodge, because those who do so at their own peril. I am not doing this because I want to be a hero or a martyr. I'm doing it because I have to. So if you hear about my suicide because I decided to fly from the top of a 16-story building, please be advised in advance that I did not do that. Or if you read that my car caught fire because my carburetor exploded, my carburetor is fine, thank you. In other words, I did not commit suicide. And the reason that I will not commit suicide is because I believe that only God can take life. I want you to know that those who believe in the ancient mystery religion do not have a similar concern. They believe that murder is acceptable if it protects the secret. So if you believe in the power of prayer, may I suggest that you commit me in prayer to the Creator God of the universe. I am not too proud to ask for prayer because I believe that prayer is simply what is protecting me even today. I would now like to return to my discussion of the Masonic Lodge. The Masons are also concealing a secret from the public. Carl Claudy, a 33rd degree Mason, has written this: "He who hears but the words of Freemasonry misses their meaning entirely." I'm going to show you just what the words of the Masons conceal. One of those secrets inside the Masonic Lodge is that there are two layers inside the Brotherhood. Manly P. Hall wrote this: "Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. It is necessary to establish the existence of these two separate yet interdependent orders, the one visible and the other invisible. The visible society is a splendid camaraderie of free and accepted men, enjoined to devote themselves to ethical, educational, fraternal, patriotic, and humanitarian concerns. The invisible society is a secret fraternity. Notice that there are two layers inside the Masonic lodges. If one is quote, enjoined to patriotic and humanitarian concerns, unquote, what is the other one enjoined to? It must not be patriotic and humanitarian, or they wouldn't need to form it. They are saying that the second layer must be anti-patriotic and anti-humanitarian. It must be, or there would be no need to create the second layer. So to make the point once again, the Masonic Lodge has two layers inside, those who know the secret and those who do not. And that secret layer is concealed inside the Masonic Lodge in part by the use of a coded language. Once those who study the Masonic Lodge break the code, they can understand a great deal about the Masonic Lodge. I'd like to refer once again to Albert Pike the Mason because he taught his readers a simple but very profound Masonic truth on the bottom of page 324 of his book entitled Morals and Dogma. This is what he wrote: "What is superior is as that which is inferior, and what is below is as that which is above, to form the marvels of unity." What that means is that everything the Masons say in public is just the opposite to what is the truth. Mr. Pike amplified this comment in his second book entitled Legenda. He wrote, "What is below, you have already heard us say, equals or resembles what is above. What is above equals or resembles what is below." Once you understand this, then you have broken the code of Masonic language. We can then find out what that secret is that the secret layer inside the lodge is concealing from their brother Masons. You can see this principle at work in a drawing used inside a key Masonic book, and this is that book entitled A Bridge to Light. This is another of the official books of the Masonic Lodge because it was published by the Grand Council of the 33rd degree in Washington, D.C. This is a picture of the author, Rex Hutchins, a 33rd degree Mason. Notice that Mr. Hutchins is seated, shown in the right here, on the lower right, beneath the portrait of Albert Pike. I believe that this picture is telling us that Mr. Hutchins greatly admires Mr. Pike because he is seated at his feet. In his book, Mr. Hutchins published this picture. It appears to be the picture of two kings, one the reflection of another, or the other rather. But first of all, notice the figure of the snake around the entire picture. Notice that it is biting its tail, which is a symbol of eternity. We will see other examples of the symbol later on in this lecture. Now here's another example of the snake biting its tail. This is the seal of the Library Association of Portland, Oregon. I do not know why they chose to select this symbol on the inside cover of their books, but we can plainly see that they did. Perhaps the answer was given in a book written by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky called The Secret Doctrine. She wrote this on page 364. The serpent has ever been the symbol of the adept and his powers of divine knowledge. So the serpent is the symbol with a hidden meaning. Once again, now, this is the picture of the two kings. Notice that the artist used a snake to make a point. The snake is a worldwide symbol of another god, and we shall discuss that later. Then notice that the picture appears once again to be of a king or god looking at the viewer above what appears to be his reflection in a pool. The original artist on this drawing was Eliphas Levi in his book, and here's the picture of Mr. Book, and his book was entitled Master of Occultism. On one of the unnumbered pages inside his book, he shows the same picture of the two-headed god, and he said that the figure was that of a god. Most people see the picture and do not examine it carefully enough, and they go on to other things. But Mr. Pike is saying that we must examine what the Masons say with great clarity. We must look more carefully. And if you do look more carefully at the picture, you will first notice that everything changes in color from the top drawing to the bottom. For instance, notice that the king's shirt that is black in the top drawing becomes white in the bottom picture, and that his banner around his neck changes from white to black. I think this is a close-up of the face on the top. And there you can see the snake biting its tail. Now, this is the entire drawing flipped over. Yeah, there it is. Meaning that the bottom half of the drawing is now on the top. In other words, the bottom is now on the top, and the top is now on the bottom. And let's take a close-up look at the god on the bottom, now shown on the top, and there it is. Somehow, I don't think that's the same king that we saw a few minutes ago. It looks like the king that they're really worshiping is really a demon. In other words, that which is on top is as that which is on the bottom. According to Albert Pike, if we reverse things, we discover the real truth of the Masonic Lodge. We think the Masons are worshiping a good God, but the truth is that they are in reality worshiping a demon. We, the public, do not examine things carefully enough, and because we do not, they are able to conceal truths from us. Notice that when you reverse things, everything becomes clear, because Pike wrote, that which is above is that which is below. We think the Masons worship the God of the Bible, but Albert Pike said that we were to reverse things, and when we did, we would see the truth. We will see that Masons worship a demon. We don't examine what the Masons are saying in enough detail. Most people in America know nothing at all about the Masonic Lodge, but what little we do know is generally good. Most of us have friends, relatives, and business associates who belong to the Masonic Lodge. And I would say that this is the general perception of those who know anything at all about the Masons. They love their country, their God, and their family. And we can discover that the Masons claim to be just that. The 33rd Degree Council in Washington, D.C. prints a magazine called the New Age magazine. The name of this magazine has recently been changed to the Scottish Rite Journal, perhaps because of all the negative press the New Age religion has been getting recently. I'd like to have you look at 4 articles that I have found in several of these magazines. I believe they will reveal the truth about what the Masons truly believe. Remember the principle of reversal as told to us by Albert Pike. This is the first article we're going to examine. The headline reads, God Bless America. Most people think that this means that the Masons worship the God of the Bible. But if you remember the principle of reversal, you will find that they worship another God. And I shall attempt to reveal to you just who this other God is. It is definitely not the God of the Bible. We think that they worship this kindly old king, and in truth, the Masons worship this demon. The second article is entitled Preserving the Constitution. I want you to know that the inner core of the Masons do not wish to preserve the Constitution. In fact, as I discuss in my Happy 4th of July speech, the Masons among the founding fathers of this nation actually subverted the very document that they wrote. Masons do not wish to preserve the Constitution because Masons wish to destroy it. I will continue to examine this as I continue with this discussion. The third article is entitled George Washington, an Example to Follow. It is well known inside historical circles that George Washington was a public member of the Masons. This is a picture of our president in his Masonic apron, wearing Masonic square and compass around his neck and other signs of his membership on him. It is commonly known that he was a member, as I said. He was very visible and frequently appeared in Masonic attire in public. For instance, this is a drawing of the president laying the cornerstone of the United States Capitol building on September the 18th, 1793. Notice that he is dressed in his Masonic attire and that most of the men around him are dressed as Masons as well. But President Washington was not an example for other Masons to follow. He wrote a letter. Apparently that slide didn't come down. Let's see if we can get that one to come back up now. Up, it won't come down. Hold on, let me push this button. Let it cycle. Well, something happened to the bottom slide. Well, we're missing a slide there, and we'll stick with this one. The next one won't come down. He wrote a letter on September the 25th, 1798, just a short time before he died, in which he said, I have to correct an error you have run into of my presiding over the English lodges in this country. And now we'll read this slide. The fact is that I preside over none, nor have I been in one more than once or twice within the last 30 years. It doesn't seem that President Washington was a very good Mason because the Masons encourage lodge attendance. But the Masons remind the American people of their pride in the fact that President Washington was a Mason. By the way, it is interesting to note that they failed to mention that Benedict Arnold, another American general, like General Washington, was a traitor to the cause of the American Revolution. And this man, Benedict Arnold, was also a Mason. It seems that the Masons are very selective about which general they wish to acknowledge and which general they wish to forget. And let me tell you this, Jesse James, the famous outlaw, was also a 33rd degree Mason. So the Masons are very selective about who they wish to acknowledge as an example to show us. The fraud and lies about the Masons extends into the public perception of them as well. I'm certain most Americans have heard about the Shriners. Most of us have seen them on motorcycles or on horses in public parades. For instance, this is a group of the Tucson Shriners dressed as clowns taking children for a ride around a hospital. This is typical of the image we have of what they do. We've heard about their sponsorship of the annual East-West Shrine football game, or we've attended their shrine circuses in our hometown, or we've heard about their 19 orthopedic hospitals and 3 burn hospitals for children. But all of this is a cover, as I will now prove. This is a 1986 newspaper article that reports that only 1/3 of their money raised goes to charities. Once again, that slide is out of order. 2/3 are kept by them. Only 1% of their profits for the shrine circuses goes for the care of children. And to show you that the Masons use the circuses as a fundraiser for their own activities, this is a book put out by the Shriners in Tucson. On page 11 of that book, this is what they tell us. The Shriners admit in their own literature, we all know the dues we pay each year are not sufficient to enable us to have the beautiful mosque we have. That's their temple. And to also carry on the labors and activities that contribute to a successful year of constructive accomplishments. Therefore, it is necessary for the temple to find some other sources of revenue. Traditionally, the Shrine Circus is the most important fundraising project that we carry out. Notice that the Shriners admit that the money raised through their circus is not used for charity. It is used to maintain their mosque, meaning their temple and their other activities. And to confirm that, this is a handout for the Shrine Circus brought to Tucson in March of 1992. And this is a close-up of the bottom part of the advertisement. Notice that it says, and I've reprinted the words on the print here, proceeds are for the benefit of Sabar Shrine, and that is the name of the shrine in Tucson. And then went on to say, payments are not deductible as charitable contributions. So it appears that the newspaper article about the IRS audit is correct. So notice that, so remember that when you hear about the charitable works of the Shriners, they use these circuses as a way to collect money for their own activities. I'd now like to explain a little bit about the various Masonic organizations. Now, this is a drawing of that Masonic organization. I have added the color to the drawing myself to make it a little easier to understand. The Mason who joins the organization starts at the bottom of the blue rectangles. Those three blue rectangles are called the Blue Lodge, and there are 3 degrees inside this section, each one shown by the three blocks, one on top of the other. The Mason who asks to join the lodge joins what they call the Blue Lodge and goes through a ritual in each of the 3 degrees. As I've already discussed, he memorizes prepared answers to a series of questions asked him by the lodge brother in charge. After he completes the 3 degrees, he can stop there and call himself a Blue Lodge Mason. Perhaps you have a relative who is a Blue Lodge member, or you are a member yourself. However, if the Blue Lodge Mason wishes to go further inside the organization, he has 2 choices. He can join either one of the 2 arms shown in green or yellow on the drawing. The one on the left is called the Scottish Rite of Masonry, and that was shown in the green, and the one on the right is called the York Rite of Masonry, shown in yellow. So here's that drawing now, the upper part. The Scottish Rite is shown on the left in green, and the York Rite is shown on the right in yellow. The York, we'll talk about briefly talk about the York Rite first. It has 10 more degrees for a total of 13. I don't think they show 10 there, but there are 10 more, I believe, for a total of 13. Now, this is a drawing of the York Rite of Masonry drawn by a Masonic magazine. And I think here you see the 10 degrees. Here they show the 13 degrees total, the 3 from the Blue Lodge on the bottom of the ladder, and the 10 degrees of the York Rite. When the Mason reaches the top of the York Rite, he is called a Knight Templar Mason. And this is a picture of a group of Knight Templar Masons shown wearing their lodge paraphernalia. One of the Masons in that picture is John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of President Abraham Lincoln in 1865. John Wilkes Booth was a Knights Templar Mason. The picture that I just showed you was carried by his wife in the family Bible and was included in a book written about the assassin by her granddaughter. The Blue Lodge Mason can also join the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the rite shown in green in the drawing. This rite has 29 more degrees for a total of 32, meaning 3 of the Blue Lodge and 29 of the Scottish Rite for a total of 32. Perhaps you have heard someone say that they were a 32nd degree Mason. That means that person has completed all but the top degree of the Scottish Rite degrees. The Scottish Rite of Freemasonry has another division inside of it. There is a northern jurisdiction and a southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite divided prior to the Civil War, and whether or not you are a northern jurisdiction Mason or a southern jurisdiction Mason is based upon where you live in the United States. The northern jurisdiction consists of states in the northern part of America, and the southern and the western states are inside the southern jurisdiction. It is interesting, for reasons that I will explain later in this video, that at least 3 of the degrees inside the Scottish Rite have rather revealing names. The 15th degree of the 32 degrees of the Scottish Rite is called the Knight of the East, or of the Eagle. The 25th degree is called the Knight of the Brazen Serpent. And the 28th degree inside the Scottish Rite is called the Knight of the Sun. The eagle, the serpent, and the sun are symbols of extreme importance, and I will explain why that is so later on in this video. So please remember that the Scottish Rite Masons named various of their degrees after those 3 symbols. There is another degree that I must mention at this point, and that is the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite Masonic Lodge. This degree is honorary, meaning only those invited into this degree can call themselves a 33rd degree Mason. This is the highest degree of all of the Masonic lodges in America, and quite a list of important people have been members. For instance, I have been or will be quoting a series of 33rd degree Masons during this lecture. Men like Manly P. Hall, Albert Pike, Rex Hutchins, Henry Wilson Coyle, Carl Claudy, Albert Mackey, Henry Clausen, Siegfried Kleinecht. All of these men are 33rd degree Masons. By the way, I would like to digress for just a moment and add another interesting and thought-provoking comment about some other 33rd degree Masons. In 1987, during the hearings in the Senate of the United States on the appointment of federal judge David Santel, a senator and a member of the Masons, stood up and discussed the judge's membership in the Masonic Lodge. These gentlemen discussed the involvement in the Masonic Lodge of 18 senators. They said that these senators were members of the Masons: Charles Grassley, Jim McClure, Sam Nunn, Arlen Specter, Bennett Johnson, John Stennis, Jim Exon, Senator Jesse Helms, Quentin Burdick, Senator John Glenn, Mark Hatfield, Fritz Hollings, Lloyd Benson, and Robert Stafford are all members of the Masonic Lodge, and they were covered in that report in the Congressional Record. The article then said that these senators were 33rd degree Masons. Senator Bob Dole, 33rd degree Mason. Senator Robert Byrd, 33rd degree Mason. Senator Alan Simpson, 33rd degree Mason. Senator Strom Thurmond, 33rd degree Mason. And another book on the Masons said that the so-called conservative leader, Jack Kemp, is a Mason. In fact, it said he was a 33rd degree Mason, as is 33rd degree Mason Barry Goldwater. Notice that all of the so-called, quote, conservative, unquote, senators and political leaders are at least 32nd degree Masons, and that most are 33rd degree Masons. And I think there is a reason for this. And to understand why all of the so-called conservative leaders are Masons, one must understand what Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism, called dialectic materialism. Mr. Marx stated that the communist position on any issue was called the thesis, and that it would be opposed by the opposite position, what he called the antithesis, or, if you will, antithesis. Out of this struggle between these two positions would come the result, the synthesis. Now, if you are the leader of the thesis position and you want your desired result, called the synthesis, to emerge from the struggle between the two, it is in your best interest to control the antithesis as well. Let me illustrate that point by going to the subject of football teams. Let's say that you are the coach of the football team at Notre Dame University, and you want to go undefeated and win all of your 11 games this year. The best way to do that is, of course, to schedule 11 games against teams like Slippery Rock University. And I can guarantee you, almost exclusively, you'll go undefeated. That is the best way to achieve your goal. If you are the controllers of this conspiracy that I've been talking about and want to produce a desired result, the best way to do it is to first offer the problem, secondly, control your opposition, and then to direct the results until you get what you want. If you want to achieve your desired result in the battle between the liberal and the conservative, and out of that struggle you want to get to your desired result, meaning socialism, the way to do that is to make certain that you control the opposition. And the way to do that is to make certain that their position cannot win the struggle. And the way to do that is to weaken the opposition. And the way to do that is to make certain that the leaders of your opposition are all members of the Masonic Lodge. The solution is like sending the cavalry into a battle against superior odds, and then making certain that the general you send into the battle cannot win it. In other words, when the general looks behind him to see how many troops he has, he only sees 3 or 4 other soldiers. That is the way to make certain the general loses. The so-called conservative Masons are the loyal opposition, They are to make certain that the conservative position loses, and to make certain that the conspiracy side always wins. This conspiracy has been successful, and the high-ranking Masons in the Senate and in the government are the certain losers. They make certain that we lose. So what I am saying is that we, the American people, should be wary. We should understand that we are being conned into thinking that the debate is honest and that the best side wins. That is not the truth, because the so-called, quote, conservative, unquote, leaders are all Masons. Now, I'd like to return to my discussion of the Masonic Lodge. The Masons are very exclusive in their membership. Only certain types of people can ask to be members. I'd like to return once again to Duncan's Ritual of Freemasonry, a copy of the ritual of the first 7 degrees inside the Masonic Lodge. It reports that during the 3rd degree initiation ceremony, the initiate says, "I will not aid nor be present at the initiation, passing, or raising of a woman, an old man in his dotage, a young man in his nonage, I guess, an atheist, a madman, or fool, knowing them to be such." That means that only white, freeborn men in their middle years can become a Mason. All others are excluded. Notice that there are no black Masons inside the all-white Masonic lodges. Yet the Masons, to my knowledge, have never been charged with discrimination in a civil rights violation. To include these other groups of people in their Masonic order, the male Masons have created other organizations specifically for these excluded members. They have created Eastern Star for the female relatives of Masons. They've created the D Malay for the young man of the Masonic member. And by the way, the D Malay was named after an early Mason. And I will talk more about who this man was a little later. They've created Job's Daughters, or Rainbow Girls, for the young women. And they've created Prince Hall lodges for the blacks who want to join the Masonic Lodge. To show you that black Masons are excluded from the Masonic Lodge, this is a medallion commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Mason named Prince Hall. You might not be able to see it, but the man shown in relief on the medallion is wearing a tri-cornered hat, a sign that he was an American revolutionary. In fact, Prince Hall was a war hero during the American Revolution, and he asked to join the Masonic Lodge of British soldiers in 1775. 11 days later, he formed the first all-black lodge in America. The Masons commemorated his membership by naming the black lodges after Mr. Hall. Today, in the era of civil rights, and where one group may not exclude blacks or women from their organization without being fined for discrimination, I think it is a fair question to ask why it is that the Masons are able to get away with discrimination. Once again, to my knowledge, there has never been a civil rights lawsuit against the Masons for racial or sexual discrimination. But other organizations in America have been sued and fined. Quite possibly the answer to that question is in a belief that I have that most of America's federal judges are members of the Masonic Lodge. And it is unlikely that they would want to find their own organization guilty of racial or sexual discrimination. As I have shown, it is also known that many men in the Congress and the Senate of the United States government are Masons. And I do not believe that they would allow their organization to be charged with a civil rights violation. Another group formed by the Masons is a group I've already briefly discussed called the Shriners. This group is made up of 32nd degree Scottish Rite Masons and 13th degree York Rite Masons. Many men that I have talked to say that the Shriners are the Masons who have all of the fun, and that is why they joined the Masons in the first place. That might be true in a lot of cases, but the Shriners also have a troubled past that most Shriners do not know anything at all about. This is a book entitled Parade to Glory that I found in a used bookstore some time ago. It appears to be a book that is to be given to the new member of the shrine after he is initiated. Notice that the man shown on the cover is apparently walking towards the new Shriner and has extended his right hand out as a greeting to the new member. Notice also that the man on the cover is wearing a red hat. It is a rather distinctive hat and is only worn by a member of the shrine in America. That hat is called a fez. And this is a color picture of one out of a catalog of a supplier of Masonic regalia. Notice that the caption calls this hat noble, the noble fez. However, the truth behind the fez is rather disturbing and not noble at all. This story was told to me by a friend of mine named Mick Oxley, who is not only an ex-Mason, but also an ex-Muslim who lived in the area of the world where the fez hat is worn by other people. Mr. Oxley shared this story with me, and I would like to share it with you. He assured me that the story is well known in Morocco, the area where the town of Fez is located. During World War II, Mick Oxley was a Muslim and he lived in the area. He tells the story of a town in North Africa called Fez near Algiers. You can see it in the middle of this map. In around 800 AD, the Muslims entered the town of Fez and slaughtered somewhere between 20,000 to 50,000 Christians. They slaughtered the people, men, women, and children, simply because they were Christians. The story continues that the blood ran so heavy after the slaughter that the town was red, and that the Muslims dipped their hats in the blood of the Christians as a sign of their victory over their victims. And the hat, which is made only in the town of Fez, is a 1,200-year symbol of their victory over the Christians. And the Shriners wear fezzes. You can ask and then answer the question for yourself as to whether or not the Shriners in America know the story about their hat. But I want you, the viewer, to know that I believe that at least certain Shriners know the story of the fez. Later, I will show you the evidence that the Masons take an oath to destroy Christianity, just like the Muslims did when they murdered Christians in the city of Fez, Morocco. So the fact that most Shriners probably do not know the history of their own hat means little to someone like myself, because I can prove that Masons take an oath to destroy Christianity. But the Shriners tell a slightly different story about their fez. This is that book, again, that I showed you a few minutes ago, put out in 1977 by the Sabah Shrine Temple in Tucson. On page 5 of this book, the Shriners tell us, it's on the right-hand side of this page, on the lower right, it says the fez. The Shriners tell us why they wear the fez, and this is what it says. The fez, which nobles of the mystic shrine of North America have the privilege and honor of wearing. Notice here that the Shriners claim it is a privilege and an honor to wear a hat that commemorates the vicious slaughter of innocent Christian women and children. The quote continues, has been handed down through the ages as one of the most significant headdresses. Now here they admit that the fez is an old item. Mick Oxley says that the slaughter dates back to 800 AD, now over 1,100 years ago. The Shriners continue. The fez derives its name from the place where it first was manufactured commercially, the holy city of Fez in Morocco. Notice that here they connect the hat to the holy city of Fez. If Fez was considered to be a holy city, the Muslims might not tolerate the fact that non-Muslim Christians were living in it. See how the Shriners tell the truth in hidden language? They admit that the wearing of the fez is an old custom and that it was named after a holy city in Morocco. But if you know the entire truth about the city and its strange hat, then their words become understandable. I think the Shriners know the story about the fez. During their initiation ceremony, all of the Shriners, quote, seal their solemn oath in the name of Allah, the God of the Arab, the Muslim, and Mohammedan, the God of our fathers. I want you to remember that many Christians in America became Shriners, and during their initiation into the Shriners, these Christians take an oath in the name of Allah. One can only wonder how a Christian can justify that. Later in their ritual, Shriners acknowledge Islam as the only true faith. Once again, you might ask your Shriner friend, who is a Christian, how he can take an oath in the name of Allah and acknowledge Islam as the one true faith when he is a Christian, a believer in the God of the Bible. He probably will not have an answer. As I said before, the new Mason goes through 3 initiation ceremonies in the Blue Lodge. During the ceremony, the initiate is asked this question in each of the 3 degrees. What do you most desire? And the initiate answers, In the first degree, he answers, I desire light. In the second degree, more light. And in the third degree, further light. But what this light is, or from where it comes, is not easily explained. But if you know where to look, any researcher can discover the source of this light. Albert Pike, in his book Morals and Dogma, says that the Mason is familiar with the doctrine that the Supreme Being is a center of light whose rays or emanations pervade the universe. For that is the light for which all Masonic journeys are a search, and of which the sun and moon in our lodges are only only emblems. And so here we see for the first time that the Masons connect this search for light with the sun. I will discuss just what the sun means in the next section of this lecture. This is a drawing of an ad found in a magazine known as Gnosis. Gnosis is Latin for knowledge, and if you will notice, the path in the drawing leads upward to a round object, presumably the sun. It appears as if the woman on the horse, which you can't see on this picture, but she's at the bottom, is going to the sun, meaning the source of light. So it is not just the Mason who is seeking light from the sun. Those seeking knowledge or truth are called Gnostics, and according to Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who wrote the following on page 386 of her book entitled The Secret Doctrine, it is in the religious doctrines of the Gnostics that the real meaning of the dragon, the serpent, the goat, and all those symbols of powers now called evil can be seen the best. In their rituals, the Masons tell the initiate that the light he is asking for is the Masonic truth. But nowhere that I can find do the Masons tell the initiate during the ceremony where this light comes from, nor that it is a symbol of something else. But it is possible to know because we can find the answer to that question in other writings of the Masons themselves. To show you that the light is more than a light from the sun or from light bulbs, W.L. Wilmshurst, a member of the Masons, said this in his book entitled The Masonic Initiation. Masonry being essentially and expressly a quest after supernatural light. So this light comes from a God, but the question that quote does not answer is just which God this light comes from. The answer to that question can be found on page 321 of Morals and Dogma, the book written by Albert Pike. Mr. Pike tells the reader where the light that the Mason asks for comes from. This is what he wrote, page 321, Morals and Dogma. If you don't believe me, check it out yourself. Albert Pike wrote, Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not. So the number one Mason of all time says that the Mason receives the light that he is in search of from Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer brings the light to the Mason, but only certain Masons can know it and thereby receive it. Albert Pike has told us in his own words. Once again, that quote may be found on page 321 of Morals and Dogma if anyone would like to check to see if I quoted Mr. Pike correctly. And to make certain that the reader can know that Lucifer brings the light that the initiate asks for, Mr. Pike repeats the thought on page 324. This is what he wrote on that page, a devil, the fallen Lucifer or light bearer. So the Mason asks for light from the light bearer Lucifer. And certain Masons know that single truth, and they are keeping that secret from the remainder of the Masons. I'd like to break the narrative at this point to tell you a little story that was told to me by someone who had read my book entitled The New World Order. This gentleman mailed me a copy of a video to document his story, and I have taken some slides from the cameraman's coverage of the event. On Saturday, forgive me, that article's kind of lopsided, my photograph. On Saturday, September the 15th, 1991, Masons in Canton, Ohio, commemorated the assassination of President William McKinley. McKinley was a Mason who apparently was born in or lived in Canton, and the Masons wanted to commemorate his death. They planned a parade that day that ended at the McKinley National Memorial, the resting place of the martyred president. This is a slide of the statue of President McKinley in front of the memorial building in the rear. It is interesting to note at this time that the memorial building that we just saw a picture of from the outside has a built-in Masonic symbol in its ceiling. This is a shot of what appears to be a stained glass window at the top of the memorial. If you count the squares with the second square inside them around the circumference of the circle, the second circle it should be. If you count the squares with the second square inside them, oh, I see what I'm saying. Okay. Around the circumference of the circle, you will count 32 of them. And then the circle in the inside would be the 33rd. I will explain the significance of this a little later. This is a picture of a funeral hearse carrying the mock casket of the slain president being driven through the city of Canton. The Masons showed up in force wearing their strange regalia and carrying their banners and flags. The following are a series of slides taken from the video showing the various Masonic organizations involved in the mock funeral. This is a slide of the Knights Templar Masons marching behind their flag. The group for the girls showed up. This is the Rainbow Girls carrying their flag, and some of the girls shown in the picture. And the DeMolay for young men showed up. This is a group for young men behind their banner. And the Job's Daughters marched as well in their white dresses and behind their flag. And this is a group of the Scottish Rite Masons marching with their aprons on. The man in the hat on the right appears to be their president, called the Worshipful Master. These men and women all gathered at the steps at the base of this McKinley's memorial, and there we have the speaker and the Masons in their aprons and their regalia standing behind them. But as they started their speech, the audience started to hear an airplane motor. When those in attendance looked up, I know this is very hard to see, but there's a little tiny airplane on the left trailing a large banner. They saw this airplane flying the banner, and everyone in the audience looked up to hear it because of the noise. The sign that the banner was carrying, I know this is hard to read as well, says, "Is Lucifer God of Lucifer, God of Freemasonry?" The man who organized the airplane flyby told me that the man who made the banner misspelled Freemasonry by leaving out the first R in the word Freemasonry, but other than that, their attempts were successful. I am quite certain that only a small percentage of the Masons in attendance knew the answer to that question was, yes, Lucifer is the god of the Masons, and I'm going to prove that. But it is certain that some in attendance knew the truth. But to show you that not only can the Mason know the truth from Mr. Pike, he can know it from other Masons. In other words, other Masons have confirmed that Lucifer is the being that brings light to the Masonic Lodge. This is Manly P. Hall's book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. You might remember that Mr. Hall was a 33rd degree Mason and that he was one of the leading writers of all time in the Masonic Lodge. This is a recommended reading list for those who want to know what to buy their Masonic relatives. The book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry is shown on the lower left of the page under the yellow that I put on the listing. In other words, the book is on the recommended reading list for all Masons to buy and then read. The book was not published by the Masons, as was Mr. Pike's book, but here you can see that the Masons are recommending that other Masons should buy this book and then read it. So you can know that this book is one that is recommended by the Masonic Lodge. This is official information. And on page 48 of that book, Mr. Hall says this, quote, "When the Mason learns the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of the living power, he has learned the mystery of the crafts." What that means is that once the Mason has figured it out, that Mason knows the secret of the Masonic Lodge. Notice that this must be the single truth of the Masonic Lodge, because Mr. Hall states that he who has figured it out has learned the secret. Mr. Hall went on, "The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands. And before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy." Notice that I am not quoting from the works of non-Masons. I am quoting from the writings of the Masons themselves. The Masonic writers are telling the public that they conceal a worship of Lucifer from the rest of the Masonic Lodge. It is true. Lucifer is the light bearer, and the Mason who figures it out has discovered the single secret of the Masonic Lodge. The Masons have said it themselves. But to show you that others beside Masons know that this is true, I'd like to quote from David Spangler, a believer in the New Age religion sweeping the world. This is a very poor quality slide taken off of a television program to show you that David Spangler is real. This is what he's written. The light comes from Lucifer. He is the light giver. It is his light that heralds for man the dawn of a greater consciousness. Another who believes that is Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, another New Age leader and perhaps the earliest of the more modern ones. She wrote the book called The Secret Doctrine in 1888, and in it she confirms what Albert Pike and David Spangler wrote. She says this on page 111. Satan is also Lucifer, the bright angel of light, the light and life bringer. And this quote is from Mikhail Bakunin, the socialist or communist I've quoted before, who also understood the role of Lucifer in man's history. This is what he wrote. The evil one is the satanic revolt against divine authority. Revolt in which we see the fecund, meaning fertile, so in which we see the fertile germ of all human emancipation, the revolution. Socialists recognize each other by the words in the name of the one to whom a great wrong has been done. Satan is the eternal rebel, the first freethinker, and the emancipator of worlds. He, Satan, makes man ashamed of his bestial ignorance and obedience. He, Satan, emancipates him, stamps upon his brow the seal of liberty and humanity in urging him to disobey and eat the fruit of the knowledge. We could spend 3 months on just that quote alone, and I'm going to try to explain to you what all that means as we continue, because he's not the only one saying this. And we'll try to make that clear in this lecture. Benjamin Krem has said that the group that he calls the hierarchy is led by a god named Sanat Kumara, the Lord of the world. I do not believe that it is a coincidence that the name Sanat is a misspelling of the name Satan, because I believe that it is the being known as Satan that is the leader of the group known as the hierarchy. In any event, notice that this Sanat is, quote, the Lord of the world. The Bible says in 2 Corinthians that Satan is the God of the world. So I think that Sanat and Satan are the same God. So the God of the hierarchy is Satan, called Sanat Kumara by those who believe in him. Mr. Krem tells us that after Sanat Kumara takes over, the masters will set up schools called mystery schools. These will be the ones previously set up by the Atlanteans and the Egyptians, and hundreds of thousands will go through the portals of initiation. This is what he said. The Society of Freemasons is the oldest on earth, dating back to Atlantean times, meaning Atlanta, this legendary continent that submerged in some time in the past. Locked up in its rituals and symbols are some of the secrets of initiation. When the necessary purification has taken place, Freemasonry will constitute one of the paths of initiation. Freemasonry will be open to all those men and women who fit themselves for entry to the mysteries. Mr. Krem goes on to explain who is the originator of these initiations. The Christ, Maitreya, is the Hierophant. A Hierophant is an interpreter of sacred mysteries or esoteric principles. So the Christ, Maitreya, is the Hierophant at the first and second initiations. The third and higher initiations being taken before the Lord of the world, Sanat Kumara. So Mr. Krem went on to explain a little about the 6 initiations. He claims that Jesus Christ is a 4th degree initiate. He wrote that Jesus entered the world at Bethlehem as a 3rd degree initiate. He wrote that Jesus had to undergo the 4th initiation known as the crucifixion. He went on to say that in the East, this initiation is called the Great Renunciation, when all is renounced, position, family, even life itself if necessary, for the higher spiritual life. Then Mr. Krem went on, then follows the fifth initiation, the resurrection, when the initiate stands free from the pull of matter forever, a perfected master. The ascension marks the sixth initiatory experience and confers cosmic consciousness and total immortality of the body to the ascended master. Mr. Krem further illustrated his claims by making this statement. Leonardo da Vinci was a fourth degree initiate, but Leonardo da Vinci is today living on Sirius. Sirius is a star in the universe. So Leonardo da Vinci was not, in fact, from our Earth evolution, but was an avatar from the planet Mercury. So if I'm reading this information correctly, this next quote will really please the Christians who believe that Satan is not a god and that the God of the Bible is the Father of Jesus. Benjamin Krem said this on page 84 of his book entitled Maitreya's Mission. Question. When Christ said, this question is asked to Benjamin Krem, he's not going to answer it. When Christ Jesus said, I go to the Father, did he in fact refer to Sai Baba? Sai Baba is an Indian guru. I believe he's alive and living in India right now. So Mr. Krem answered, no, he, Jesus, referred to Sanat Kumara, the Lord of the world. So here Mr. Krem is claiming that Satan is the father of Jesus Christ. I didn't say that. Benjamin Krem said it, and he said it for Lord Maitreya, the so-called Jesus on this earth right now. This is called pure blasphemy. Krem is saying that Jesus is a disciple of the Sanat Kumara and is denying his claim that he is the Son of God or God himself. Krem also said this on page 87 of his book entitled Maitreya's Mission. The idea of the Immaculate Conception is an invention of the Church Fathers to emphasize the divinity of Jesus as the Son of God. That thought that Lucifer was a good spirit to whom a great wrong was done is the basic thought that holds the New Age together. According to Tex Mars, the author of two major books on the subject, has written this. Many New Agers commend Lucifer because by tempting Eve, he enabled man to evolve towards enlightened knowledge and Godhead. Mr. Mars later recognized the thoughts of a leader in a mystical organization called the Stell Group, named after Eklal Kushana, and I'm pronouncing that the best way I know how. That's an approximation. Mr. Mars wrote that this New Age leader says that Lucifer is the head of a secret brotherhood of spirits. The brotherhood is named after Lucifer because the great angel Lucifer has been responsible for the abolishment of Eden, in order that man could begin on the road to spiritual advancement. The Bible confirms that Lucifer, also known as Satan, the devil, is definitely not an angel of light, but that he can appear as an angel of light. This is what the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 11:14. For Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. I looked up the word transformed in the Bible, in the dictionary, in the dictionary, and this is what it means. It means to change in semblance. So that means that he, Satan, appears to be a light bearer, but he is not. So those in the Masonic Lodge who believe that he is the light bearer are simply in error because it's a lie. Those who hear these words must be wary. Jesus said this about Satan in John 8:44. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So Lucifer is transformed into an angel of light, but he is the father of lies. That means that he is not an angel of light, he just appears to be. It becomes important now to explain just who this being that is known as Lucifer is. To answer that question, we must go to the Bible once again. As I've said, the Masons and the New Agers the Masons and the New Agers both believe in the being in the Bible called Lucifer, also known as Satan the devil. This is what the Bible tells us in Ezekiel chapter 29, verses 13 to 17. He's talking about Lucifer, Satan the devil. Thou, meaning Lucifer, hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. Thou hast sinned, therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. Notice that the Bible teaches the reader that Lucifer was cast down to the ground, meaning the earth, from heaven. And the reason he was ejected was because he had corrupted his wisdom by reason of his brightness. This will be explained by another verse of the Bible. The Bible says this in Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. Remember that Lucifer challenged God in heaven, and for that reason he was thrown out of heaven. And the second thing to notice is that God's throne is in the north of heaven. I will explain why this is important in another section of the lecture. Jesus also explained a little more about Lucifer in Luke chapter 10, verse 18. This is what Jesus said. I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. So Lucifer was thrown out of heaven by the God of the Bible. And Albert Pike confirms that the Masons are a continuation of the belief that the light comes from Lucifer and is tempting of Adam and Eve. This is what he wrote, Albert Pike, on page 136 of his book entitled Morals and Dogma. You still advance towards the light, which is an emblem of the divine truth given by God to the first man, and preserved amid all of the vicissitudes of ages in the traditions and teachings of Masonry. And what is this thing that Pike called the divine truth? It is called knowledge by Albert Pike on page 171 of Morals and Dogma. So in our lodges ought knowledge to be dispensed. And on page 169, he tells the reader just what that knowledge is. The true use of knowledge is to distinguish good from evil. So the purpose of the Masons is to worship Lucifer as the being who freed man so that he alone could decide for himself what was right and wrong. And notice that I am proving this using the writings of the Masons themselves. Now I would like to explain the significance of the fact that the Bible says that the throne of God is in the north. This is important because of what Albert Pike said in his book entitled Morals and Dogma. We're going to repeat this quote. To the Masons, the north has been the place of darkness, and of the great lights of the lodge, none is in the north. Forgive me, we've not quoted that before, so I'm quoting it for the first time. To the Masons, the north has been the place of darkness, and of the great lights in the lodge, none is in the north. That means that the Masons know why they believe that the north is a place of darkness. It is because that is the location of the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is in the north, and that is considered to be a place of darkness in the Masonic Lodge. There is one other connection to the north being the seat of the God in the Bible. Author Michael Howard said in his book entitled The Occult Conspiracy that Osiris was the Egyptian sun god. We'll cover that more in greater detail later. Osiris traditionally rises from the dead in the north. Since I am claiming that Lucifer was expelled from the north, meaning that he was asked to leave heaven, it would follow that Osiris, being a symbol of Lucifer, would also leave the north for other points of the compass. So Osiris started his work after arising from the north, meaning that he is a symbol of Lucifer. I do not think there is anything else that needs to be said about the fact that the God of the Bible is not included in the ritual of the Masonic Lodge, although I will provide other proof a little later in this lecture. The Mason talks about Masonic truth. The Bible also speaks of truth called light by the Masons. So we're going to ask the question, what is the Masonic truth? The Bible answers that question in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, meaning Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. This means that God was instructing man that he was not to decide what was right and wrong, that God himself would instruct him. God was to teach man what was right and wrong. Man was not to decide. The Bible continues in Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. And the serpent Notice here that the devil appeared in the guise of a serpent. This is extremely significant, as we shall see as we continue our study. So the serpent appeared, said to the woman, "For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Lucifer, concealing himself inside a serpent, meaning a snake, tempted man with the knowledge of good and evil. Lucifer taught man that he was to decide for himself what was right and wrong. And if he knew what was right and wrong, he would not need God. And if he knew right and wrong, he would become as God. God is the father of all moral law. He taught man a whole series of laws through the commandments, some of which he wrote on stone. He taught man what was right and wrong. Many of them were simply written as, "Thou shalt not," and "Thou shalt." Mr. Pike told us what the morality of the Masons was in his book entitled Morals and Dogma on pages 833 and 834. Albert Pike wrote, "It is not true to say one man, however little, must not be sacrificed to another, however great, to a majority, or to all men." That is not only a fallacy, but a most dangerous one. Often one man and many men must be sacrificed in the ordinary sense of the word to the interests of the many. The interest and even the life of one man must often be sacrificed to the interest and welfare of his country. The God of the Bible taught mankind that sacrificing the life of one man for the sake of another was murder. And he further taught us that murder was not morally permissible. He taught us quite simply, "Thou shalt not murder." But here Albert Pike was telling us that murder was acceptable as long as the welfare of the country was advanced. This is also called situation ethics. Murder is acceptable as long as the situation warrants. This is the morality of the Masonic Lodge. It has been written in their book about the morals of the Masonic Order. Remember that Pike's book was entitled Morals and Dogma. Once you've made the leap to approving the murder of someone because you feel it will benefit the many, it is easy to murder millions. The New Age religion is also advocating the murder of millions. Two authors, Lafferty and Bud Hollowell, two New Agers, started the discussion about how their religion sanctions the use of violence against the Christian community. They wrote the following in their book entitled The Eternal Dance. This is not very pleasant, but we have to read it because it affects all of us. "This is a time of opportunity for those who will take it." Apparently, he is referring to those who believe in the New Age religion. For others, apparently he's referring to those who will not accept the New Age religion if the earth is unsuitable for them, meaning, once again, if they will not accept the New Age religion, they will go on to other worlds. So those who will not accept the New World Order will be forced to go on to other worlds. It sounds as if he's talking about murder because some will not want to go on to other worlds. Another New Age spokesman, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the guru sought out by the rock and roll group known as the Beatles, shown here in these two slides. There's the Yogi who is in the right-hand corner, and two of the Beatles shown in this TV picture taken off a TV set. And here they are again. There's two of them, and the Maharishi Yogi, whatever his name is, in the back. This new guru has been quoted as saying, listen to this, "There has not been and there will not be a place for the unfit." It appears as if he's talking about those who will not accept the New Age religion, primarily those who call themselves Christians. The fit will lead, and if the unfit are not coming along, meaning if they will not accept the New Age religion, there is no place for them. In the age of enlightenment, here he's referring to the New World Order, there is no place for them. Others have told us just how many of the population will go into the New World Order. Ruth Montgomery, a New Ager, has written in the following in a magazine called Magical Blend. Millions will survive and millions won't. Those who won't will go into the spirit state because there is truly no death. Another has made an estimate of the number of those who will perish. One who has made such an estimate is John Randolph Price, who was quoted by Tex Mars in his book about the New Age. He said that John Randolph Price was told by his spirit guide. By the way, a spirit guide is supposedly a being that communicates to Mr. Price from another plane. So he was told that up to 2.5 billion, with a B, billion, might perish in the coming chaos. If up to 2.5 billion might perish, then up to about half of the current world population will have to perish. But perhaps the most startling example of the teachings of this New Age religion came from the pen of Barbara Marx Hubbard, one of their most influential writers. She wrote in her book entitled Happy Birthday, Planet Earth. Hold on, this is not pleasant at all. The choice is, do you wish to become a natural Christ, a universal human, or do you wish to die? I'll read it again. The choice is, do you wish to become a natural Christ, a universal human, or do you wish to die? People will either change or die. That is the choice. I think it is important to repeat that quotation just so you, the viewer, will understand what she said. People will either change or die. That is the choice. You will accept the New World Order or die. That is the choice. Notice, I'm not saying this. I'm using the writings of those who believe in the New World Order. And I'm quoting from the #1 Mason of all time. Someone else said about the same thing, about this dying. Adolf Hitler, the head of the German government during World War II, and another who believed in the New Age religion, also felt that he had the power to exterminate the few to benefit the many, just like Albert Pike. He wrote this. Hitler wrote, I have the right to exterminate millions of individuals of inferior races which multiply like vermin. But all of this has been predicted in the Holy Bible. John in the New Testament wrote this, Yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth God service. He was writing about the Masons and the New Agers of today nearly 2,000 years ago. It will be interesting and extremely provocative at this time to give you the view of the scriptures that talk about the tempting of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden from the pen of Albert Pike, the #1 Mason of his time. This is how Mr. Pike sees these events, and he wrote this on page 567 of his book entitled Morals and Dogma. The demons forbade Adam to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. The Bible said that it was the triune God, the creator God, that forbade Adam and Eve from eating from the tree. Here Mr. Pike says that the triune God, the creator God in three persons, is three demons, or at least demons, plural. So he's talking about the God of the Bible forbade Adam, because the God of the Bible is a demon. Mr. Pike continues, by which he would have known the empire of light and that of darkness. He, meaning man, obeyed, an angel of light induced him to transgress. So Mr. Pike thinks that the God of the Bible is a demon God and that Lucifer is an angel of light. That thought is consistent with the other quotes from Albert Pike about Lucifer, Satan, the devil. That is how the Masons see the message of this account in Genesis. Notice I'm quoting the man who wrote it himself. I'd like to return once again to the thoughts of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, another Luciferian, who you might recall founded an occult organization called the Theosophical Society. I'd like to quote once again from her book entitled The Secret Doctrine, in which she adds her interpretation of the events in the book of Genesis. Adam, born an image of clay, into which the Lord God. Notice she did not capitalize the letter G in the word God as one does when one refers to the Creator God, the God of the Bible. So this Creator God, or this God, breathes the life, the breath of life, but not of intellect and discrimination, which are developed only after he has tasted of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. In other words, when he has acquired the first development of mind. She continued, it is but natural to view Satan, the serpent of Genesis, as the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright, radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the automaton created by Jehovah. And he who was the first to whisper, in the day ye eat thereof, ye shall be as Elphim, knowing good and evil, can only be regarded in the light of a Savior. So in the Bible, Lucifer is telling man that he doesn't need God to tell him what is right and wrong. He can decide for himself. This view of morality is called situation ethics. This is the philosophy taught in our public schools all over America today. Situation ethics teaches that each man is to decide for himself what is right and wrong. Man is to be free to make his own decisions about morality. Man must be completely free to use his mind, his brain, his reason. Perhaps the most cogent condensation of this philosophy is the statement made by one who believed it. Nothing is forbidden, everything is permitted. I will continue the discussion of situation ethics in the next section. This is Shirley MacLaine, the motion picture actress, the author of this and other books on the New Age religion. She has also spoken out about situation ethics. She has written comments like these: there is no such thing as evil. Evil is fear and uncertainty. Evil is what you think it is. Shirley agreed with Zena LaVey, the daughter of Church of Satan founder Anton LaVey. She appeared in an interview taped in 1989 with Bob Larson, a talk show host that he chose to call the First Family of Satanism. And during that interview, she said, there is no such thing as evil. She said, morality is a relative issue and nobody can decide good and evil. Zena appeared with Nicholas Schreck, the founder of a satanic group called the Werewolf Coven. A coven is, of course, a group of witches. Among the things Mr. Schreck said during the interview are these thoughts. What the 90s are going to see is a massive rise of Satanism. He said, people are going to come out of the shadows and reveal themselves as thoroughgoing Satanists. Because what we are seeing now is the death struggle between the Judeo-Christian idea and archetype and the more ancient satanic archetype. And he made these statements about the satanic view of morality. Nothing is mandatory. He said, we are animal beasts and we decide from our gut instinct whether we have been wronged or not. He said, we decide what is right and wrong. He said, there is no such thing as good and evil. Morality is a relative issue and nobody can decide what is good and evil. He offered these thoughts on Adolf Hitler, the initiate who killed 53 million people to create the New World Order on this earth. No one can call Hitler's extermination of 6 million Jews evil. He went on to say Hitler was a masterful black magician. And I'll end his contribution to the subject with these thoughts of his on the Christian religion. He said, the Christian religion is evil because it is negative. You, meaning the Christians, base Christianity on a fictional character. Christ is a fairy tale. So here we can see that the Satanic Church agrees with many inside the Masonic Lodge, the New Age religion, and socialists and communists. Another who expressed a similar idea was Aleister Crowley, another Satan worshiper. I'll talk more about him a little later in this lecture, but at this point I'll leave it at this. He wrote that his moral philosophy consisted of this single statement: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And the Masons agreed. Albert Pike wrote, reason is the absolute, for it is in it we must believe. Remember that Albert Pike entitled his book, Morals and Dogma. That means that this book was written to teach the Mason what the Masonic morality is. And what Mr. Pike was saying in his book about morality was that if you think it, you can do it. Adam Weishaupt, once again the founder in 1776 of the secret society called the Illuminati, agreed with this statement. He wrote this: man will be rescued from his fall through the secret schools of wisdom. Reason will be the only law of man. When at last reason becomes the religion of man, then will the problem be solved. Reason will be the code of laws to all mankind. This is our great secret. So the Masons and the Illuminati have bought the lie of Lucifer. Man is to make his own morality, his own view of right and wrong, and forget the moral teachings of God. And Albert Pike spoke for the Masons when he agreed. Human reason leaps into the throne of God and waves her torch over the ruins of the universe. Notice that Mr. Pike believed that God had messed up the universe and that Lucifer and man, using his reason, will correct the situation. Others believe that man can devise similar systems that use reason as its base. One of these was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Brzezinski wrote a book entitled Between Two Ages, in which he says that communism, specifically Marxism, is one such plan. He wrote this on page 72 of that book. Marxism is simultaneously a victory of reason over belief. What he was saying was that Marxism is based upon knowledge or fact, and that religion is based upon belief. Marxism is fact, and religion is superstition. He went on to explain what the major contribution of Marxism was: its revolutionary and broadening influence, which opened man's mind to previously ignored perspectives. Marx opened up man's mind with the lie of absolute reason. So Marx bought the lie of Lucifer, and so did Brzezinski. As I've said, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the founder of an occult group called the Theosophical Society, wrote a book entitled The Secret Doctrine in 1888, in which she talks about the secret worship of the ancient mysteries. On page 162 of that book, she says this: Lucifer, the spirit of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought. So we can see a pattern developing amongst those of the occult sciences. They all share a belief in Lucifer. These people all believe that Lucifer is the light bearer. And to show you that Albert Pike believes the same thing, he added the morality of the Masonic Lodge to the discussion. Remember that his book was entitled, once again, Morals and Dogma. This is how he described the morals of the Masonic Lodge on page 37 of his book. All truths are truths of period and not truths of eternity. And repeated the idea on page 52. What is untrue today may become true in another generation. So there are no absolutes. Whatever is true today is false tomorrow. So this is a common thought amongst the occultists. That is what is being taught in the public schools today, in America, in the field of sex education. Simply stated, there is no morality being taught in sex education today. Each individual is to decide for himself what is right and wrong in the area of sex. Parents, the rabbi, the priest, and the minister cannot teach anyone what is right and wrong about sex today. The public schools are teaching that each one is to decide for himself. And to show you that it is my opinion that the public school system is teaching situations as a national policy, let me show you this, the symbol of the National Education Association. I am not a member of this group, but in 1985, I went to their office here in Tucson and asked for this copy of their symbol. They gladly provided one for me, and when I asked the manager of the office what all of these symbols meant, he told me that he did not know. So I would like to give you my explanation. Notice, first of all, that the colors are red, white, and blue, and that means that they are patriotic. So whenever anyone is critical of their organization, they can claim that their colors are right off the American flag, and that the person making the accusation is the one that is unpatriotic. But there is, I believe, a hidden message concealed inside the entire thing. The symbol on the inside is the symbol of pi, denoting the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. Pi is called an absolute, meaning that it will be the same everywhere in the universe. Pi will have the same ratio on Earth that it will have on Mars, or for that matter, on any other planet anywhere else in the universe. The red arrow placed on top of the pi symbol, I believe, is public education. And notice that it cuts through, it pierces, or it kills the absolute symbol of pi. What this symbol is saying is that the purpose of public education, I believe, is to destroy or annihilate the absolutes in the universe. It is intended to destroy absolutes, just like Albert Pike and the others wanted. I cannot prove it, but I think that it is what these symbols are saying. I think it is fair to conclude that the symbol is saying that the public education exists to destroy absolutes. And the method they are using to destroy moral absolutes in our schools is by teaching situation ethics, the philosophy that teaches there are no moral absolutes. And that program was supported by the Masonic Lodge. Albert Pike wrote this in his book entitled Agenda. In these degrees, you become pledged to the cause of true freedom, of free thought, free speech, and free conscience. That means that in the New World Order, there will be no biblical morality. That is what Mr. Pike means by free conscience. Each man is to decide for himself what is right and wrong. There are still others who agree that there is no morality in the New World Order. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, wrote this: "Behold our secret. If in order to destroy all Christianity, remember that the end justifies the means." What he was saying was that whatever it takes to get the job done is permissible. There is no concept of morality in a philosophy such as this. There is no morality if you believe, as Adam Weishaupt taught, do whatever you have to do to advance the cause. If you have to break God's, quote, artificial, unquote, morality, you have authority from Adam Weishaupt to do so. It is interesting to examine what the Masons think about Adam Weishaupt's declaration that he and the Illuminati are out to destroy all Christianity. Those are Professor Weishaupt's own words that anyone can read if they will only look for them. This is once again Albert Mackey's encyclopedia. Mr. Mackey was a 33rd degree Mason, and he wrote what is commonly referred to as the finest Masonic encyclopedia ever written. The first page of the book says this about Albert Mackey. His, meaning Albert Mackey's, writings are universally esteemed for their sincerity, honest records, and common sense. And the book goes on to say that Mr. Mackey was a leader who valued accuracy. And this is what Albert Mackey said about the Illuminati and their leader. The original design of Illuminism was undoubtedly the elevation of the human race. He went on to say Weishaupt was a Masonic reformer. He went on to say Weishaupt could not have been the monster that he's been painted by his adversaries. He went on to say Weishaupt had hoped by it to effect much good. He went on to say his, meaning Weishaupt's, honest desire was to do much good. So we can now see what the Masons think about the Illuminati. The destruction of Christianity elevates the human race. Notice that anyone who can read the simple English language can find this out. The Illuminati was out to destroy Christianity, and the Masons praise the organization. That is found on page 347 of Volume 1 of Mackey's Encyclopedia for those who do not believe it. Now we must continue our study of the Masonic Lodge. And to do so, we must utilize their own writers. And I have done so with 9 of their own experts, each of whom is an established authority inside the Masonic fraternity. To understand the Masonic Lodge, we must explore the 33rd degree. Manly P. Hall has told us just how important it is. He wrote, philosophically, the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite represents the innermost sanctuary of Masonic mysticism. What he was saying is that this is the key degree inside all of the Masonic Lodge. We can read part of the 33rd degree initiation ceremony. It can be found on pages 363 and 364 of this book entitled Occult Theocracy by Edith Starr Miller. This book was published in 1933. But before we read that part of the ceremony, I have to furnish you with a little background that will help the viewer understand what Mrs. Miller wrote. Masons claim their first Grand Master of the Lodge was Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff is mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible as the builder of King Solomon's temple. There are at least 2 brief mentions of him in the Old Testament. From those 2 brief mentions, the Masons have built an enormous legend. The Masons tell their members that the legend they tell in their temples is at variance with the biblical account. This is what 33rd degree Mason Rex Hutchins wrote in his book entitled A Bridge to Light. This is in that book that was published by the Masonic Lodge. The biblical account of the story of Hiram is occasionally at variance with the legend as told in Masonic instruction. For example, we are told in 1 Kings 7:40 that Hiram finished all the work he had been commissioned to do by King Solomon and presumably returned to his country. But Masonic tradition asserts the death of Hiram during the construction of the temple. So the Masons acknowledge that the Bible only has part of the truth about Hiram Abiff. Their recordings of his life are more accurate and complete a story. But even the name Hiram has a concealed message. This is a little book entitled Symbolism of the 3 Degrees, written by a Mason named Oliver Day Smith. This book was given to every Mason in the state of New Jersey because it is published by the Grand Lodge of that state. This is what the author says about the name of Hiram. It is said that Hiram, in its pure and original form, literally meant light or the sun. So even the name of their hero has a concealed symbol connection to the sun. The Masons claim that Hiram was a member of the Masons and was called a Master Mason. A Master Mason is one who has the secrets of the Masonic Lodge and has taken an oath to protect those secrets even on the pain of death. The other Masons who did the actual construction were called Apprentice Masons. And Apprentice Masons do not have the secrets of the Master Masons. 3 of the Apprentice Masons decided that they wanted to know the secrets of the Master Mason, Hiram Abiff, so they confronted him as he was leaving the temple one night. Hiram Abiff refused to give the 3 men the secrets, so the last Apprentice Mason killed him. According to the legend, Hiram Abiff was murdered at the west gate of the temple, which is where the sun sets. So we can see another connection to Hiram Abiff and sun worship. The 3 scoundrels in the legend were named Jubilo, Jubilah, and Jubilam. As far as I can tell, these names are not translated by the Masons, but I believe they have something to do with the word light in Latin. A Latin dictionary defines the word jubar or jubar with these words. In literature, the light of the sun. When I took high school Spanish, I learned to conjugate words such as I am, you are, we are. So I believe that Jubilo means I am light, Jubila means she is light, and Jubilah means we are light. So the whole legend has enormous significance to the Mason and concealed truth. Now I'd like to return to our study of the 33rd degree ritual from the book entitled Occult Theocracy. I'd like to explain that Mrs. Miller, the author of the book, is not a member of the Masons, and it is a fair question to ask as to why we should believe her when she quotes from a part of the 33rd degree ritual. The reason that I believe her is because I have found other Masonic materials which confirm that she had found the truth, a part of the 33rd degree ritual. So I believe that what we are about to read is the truth. This is what Mrs. Miller said and is contained within the 33rd degree ritual. For the sovereign inspector, the 33rd is the last degree of the right. The order is the grant. The order could mean very well the 33rd degree, or perhaps even the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, is the great avenger of the assassinated Grand Master. That means that the 33rd degree, at least, is out to avenge the death of Hiram Abiff, the Grand Master of the Masonic Lodge. This is extremely significant for reasons I'm about to explain. And she went on, and the grand champion of humanity, for the innocent Grand Master is man, man who is master, king of nature, man who was born innocent and unconscious. Notice that Mrs. Miller is reporting that the Masons say that Hiram is not a man, but a symbol of all mankind. The Masons in the 33rd degree are taught that the hero of their legend is not a man, but is a symbol of all of us, meaning he represents all of humanity. The ritual declares that Hiram is the symbol of something concealed. He is not a man. He represents all of us. So what they are saying in their ritual is that the three apprentice Masons murdered mankind instead of Hiram Abiff. The ritual continues. But he, meaning Hiram, has fallen under the blows of three assassins. Three scoundrels have thwarted his happiness and rights and have annihilated him. Now we are going to see who the Masons think have destroyed Hiram, representing all of mankind. The three infamous assassins are law, property, and religion. So the ritual explains that even the scoundrels are not men, but are symbols of something else. In this case, law, property, and religion. So the Mason learns that the concept that governments restrict man's freedoms, religion teaches man absolutes, and the concept of private property restricts man's ability to enjoy his freedom. That means that the 33rd degree Mason believes that law, meaning God's law, killed mankind. The 33rd degree Mason believes that property, meaning the right to own private property, murdered mankind. And the 33rd degree Mason believes that religion, meaning man learning God's truth in church or through the Bible, killed mankind. So they're saying, quite simply, law, property, and religion murdered mankind. The quote continues as it starts to explain what the initiate into the 33rd degree has just learned. Law, because it is not in harmony with the rights of the individual man and duties of social man in society, rights which belong to all. The Mason is taught that God's law has restricted man's freedom by restricting his right to decide for himself in all things. The ritual continues. Property, because the earth belongs to nobody and its fruits belong to all, in proportion as they are required by each for the needs of his own well-being. The ritual explains that God interfered with the rights of man because he taught that we were not to steal the property of another. Man can decide for himself how to answer the question, what if the property was needed because somebody was hungry? God's commandment is not, thou shalt not steal unless you are hungry. It is simply, thou shalt not steal, period. No man has the right to take another's property, even if he is hungry. This is called a moral absolute. There are others, however, who believe the lie that property belongs to those who have need of it. One was Karl Marx, the father of so-called communism. Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto in 1848 this amazing sequence of phrases. The theory of the communists may be summed up in one single sentence. Abolition of private property. He later wrote in a booklet called The Criticism of the Gotha Program in 1875 this, and I would urge you to memorize it. Look for it. It's all around us. It's in every aspect of our life. It's in this healthcare program that Hillary Clinton is recommending to the American people. From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Marx believed that government should take from one to give to another. This is the essence of the communist philosophy. Government is intended to take property from one and give it to the poor. Government is going to take property from the rich and give it to the poor. Karl Marx does not believe in the God-given right to private property. And the Masons are teaching this. Property destroyed mankind because the earth belongs to nobody and its fruits belong to all, in proportion as they are required by each for the needs of his own well-being. So that means that the Masons and the communists both are teaching the same thing, simply the abolition of private property. And notice that I'm not making that charge. I found it in their own writings. And the New Age religion, soon to be led by this individual known as Lord Maitreya, also believes in communism. Benjamin Creme wrote this in his book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy and the Masters of Wisdom. The world will have to learn to live more simply. Every nation has assets, and these belong to all men, to all nations. Each nation will be asked to draw up an inventory of all that it possesses and all that it needs, and this will be made over to the United Nations. I say have to, it is up to us to endorse this. Nothing will be forced on us, but the advice of the hierarchy and the Christ will be to do this, to make over to trust for all men the produce of the world, to be held by United Nations agencies in trust for all, so that no country owns anything. Then that will be distributed amongst all mankind according to need. That's what Karl Marx said. Mr. Creme says that nothing will be forced on us. And I'm asking the question, what happens when someone objects to the United Nations coming to hold their property in trust for all mankind? The person who believes in the right to private property will not be allowed to survive because there will be no right to private property in the New World Order. And to confirm that, I would like to read from page 111 of Benjamin Creme's book entitled Maitreya's Mission. Mr. Creme quotes Lord Maitreya as saying, "Man must share or die." That's it. There is no more to consider. You will give up your right to private property or die. There is no other option. Notice that Mr. Creme says that all produce will be held in trust, all property, even the property of those who object. So he is lying. There will be no right to private property in the New World Order. And I'm saying that is just like the Masons want. And we're going to like this. Mr. Creme continues. This will mean for the developed third of the world an entirely new and simpler living, which will be seen to be a great deal happier. For there is nothing easier to bear than something shared. I mean, if you have it very much, it is easier if no one else has very much. So the New Age religion is communist in its basis. The Masons are also communists because they want to abolish the right to private property. So it is a fair question to ask the Masons. Why did Karl Marx say the same thing as the Masons? I can find no evidence that Karl Marx was a member of the Masonic Lodge, but he sure wrote like one. But we can say that he worshipped Satan, the devil. This is a book written by Richard Wurmbrand, a Christian minister. It is entitled, Was Karl Marx a Satanist? This book presents the evidence that Karl Marx joined the satanic cult early in his life while he was at college. I've also read that 80% of what Marx wrote has not been released because it is kept in a university somewhere in Europe. And I think the reason is because his writings would reveal that he was a Satan worshiper. So here we can see how the academic world helps in the cover-up of the connection between communism and Satanism. And to show you the academic worlds often believe in the ideas of Karl Marx, I'd like to show you this advertisement for the world's great thinkers. The ad says, their ideas have literally changed the world, and they can change your world for the better. And the man in the middle of all of those men is Karl Marx, the communist. This advertisement is saying that his ideas can change your world for the better. The idea of the communist can change your world for the better. But Karl Marx, the believers in the New Age religion, and the Masons are not the only ones to preach that we must abolish the right to private property. President Lyndon Johnson said exactly the same thing in 1964. President Lyndon Johnson said, quote, "We are going to try to take all of the money that we think is unnecessarily being spent and take it from the haves and give it to the have-nots that need it so much. There is absolutely No difference in what Karl Marx said and what Lyndon Johnson said. The two statements preach that the government exists to take from one to give to another. This means that both Karl Marx and Lyndon Johnson are talking about the abolition of private property. President Johnson created the war on poverty, wherein he put into practice what he and Karl